Well, these sounds are sacred to me. When I'm in a forest, which is wild and still vibrant with wildlife and expressing itself as a healthy environment, that's as close to the divine as I've ever got. I mean, I can't imagine being in a church or a mosque or a synagogue or any other, place that we call religious that's had a stronger impact on me. I mean, the sounds of the natural world are to me the voice of the divine. And these are the sermons on the mount. These are these are the homilies that we need to hear.
Hello, and a warm welcome to Cambridge Forum, coming to you live via Zoom. I'm Mary Stack, the Executive Director, and today we are in for an acoustic treat. We're delighted to be joined by a remarkable individual who, in addition to being a musician and an author, has actually made an indelible mark on the world by simply listening. For over 50 years, Bernie Krause has traveled to 7 continents to meticulously capture the sounds of the natural world in all its diverse magnificence. In that time, Bernie has collected over 5,000 hours of recordings of natural environments, including 15,000 terrestrial and marine species. Through his work, he's established a new bioacoustic discipline, soundscape ecology, and encouraged us all to have a newfound respect for listening rather than always looking, and given us a vocabulary to describe what we hear. His soundscape installations have been enjoyed all around the world, and fortunately, we are lucky to have one visiting us right now near Boston. Thanks to the Fondation Cartier in Paris, the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem is currently presenting the North American premiere of the GREAT Animal Orchestra. This amazing immersive audiovisual experience will be on display till May 2022. But before we speak to Bernie about how he got involved in this whole field and why he's dedicated his life to this work, I would like to introduce Jane Winchell, who's co-curator of the Peabody Essex exhibit and director of the museum's natural history, which is part of PEM's Climate and Environment Initiative. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
First, Jane, thank you for joining us today. You were pretty instrumental in bringing this exhibit across the Atlantic after seeing it in Paris. So why were you so impressed with it, and how long did it take to orchestrate the transfer of such an installation?
Well, I've been following Bernie Krause's recordings for quite a while. He's a pioneer in the field, and I heard that there was going to be this installation of his recordings in this unique audiovisual experience that was going to be premiering at the Fondation Cartier. And so I got myself over there and was really struck by how memorable the experience was. So it wasn't just the time of being in there and the experience of the specific soundscapes, but the lingering effect of it. And so when I came back, I started making a case for getting it to PEM. And these things can sometimes take a while, but working with Trevor Smith, who was the co-curator here and the director of multisensory for the museum, we together were able to make a strong case, and just so delighted and thrilled to have it at PEM.
Well, we're all delighted too. So this is pretty dramatic for an American museum to go out on a limb and have a sound-heavy exhibit here in the States. I know Bernie told me it's much more common to have this in Europe or Asia. Was this a product of lateral thinking on your part, or were you just keen to break some new ground, doing something new?
Well, we like to think of ourselves at PEM as a place that really takes on projects that are challenging and push the envelope. that's where transformation happens in our minds. And so this was the kind of experience that felt like, yes, it can be hard to describe it, but we felt confident that once people were going to be able to experience it, they'd realize, oh yeah, this was worth, bringing a project over from France during a pandemic, because of course we were opening it and working with the Fondation Cartier and the United Visual Artists at a time that was particularly difficult for international travel.
Yeah.
So first of all, how is that managed in terms of people wanting to go visit it now? How far do they have to book ahead? And personally, what's your favorite part of the installation?
Oh, well, I'll start with the logistics. So you can purchase tickets online for PEM. This is not a timed ticket experience. There is often a wait, just to let people know, but it's a situation that you can put it, you register on your phone when you get there, and so you can explore the museum. You're not standing in line waiting, which I think is a big plus. And then in terms of, and it's not an added expense. So it's just part of your general admission when you come. Gosh, I have a very hard time picking out which soundscape, because they are all so unique, which is one of the things that I feel like has made this such an effective installation, is that none of the 7 soundscapes is the same or feels the same. So yeah, I don't have a favorite. I just have the feeling of each one bringing me to a different place and a different kind of mood when I'm in there and experiencing it.
Yeah.
Bernie may have a favorite though.
I'm sure. Well, actually, we're going to jump across now to California to welcome you, Bernie. Thank you for joining us today and making time.
Thank you.
And congratulations on this exhibit, and in fact on your life's work, which can't be underestimated. Vast volume of material that you've been collecting for all of us and for posterity, really. So I know you didn't start out as a biologist, you started out as a musician. So I don't want to bore you with having to tell this story all over again, but I am very taken with the encounter that you did have with a Native American man who was on the Nez Perce Reservation, I think in Northeast Oregon, if I got that right, who told you that you white boys don't know anything about music back in the beginning of your career. So this kind of changed everything.
Well, he was right. And even though I had studied music and was a composer and played almost all the stringed instruments, and we were working on the Nez Perce Reservation up in Idaho, which is just close to the northeastern corner of Oregon, which is also part of their territory. And there was an elder with whom we were talking one evening, and he suggested to me that if we wanted to learn something about music after he made that comment, that he would take us out the next morning and teach us how we got our music. Well, I was fascinated by that. I mean, I thought that was one of those teachable moments. And 4:30 in the morning, we got in the car and we drove for several hours to get to a sacred place of the Nez Perce called Lake Wallowa in northeastern Oregon, near Enterprise, Oregon, small town there. And he sat us down by the side of a stream and told us to just sit there and wait. Well, it was in October and it was up at about 7,000 feet and very cold. And we sat there for maybe half an hour or so, and we were getting hypothermic because we weren't dressed for that. And all of a sudden there was this great wind that came down the valley from a feeder stream that was feeding that lake. And all of a sudden there was this sound of, I guess you would best describe it as a great big pipe organ that began to excite the whole area around where we were sitting, especially. And finally, this elder walked up to us and asked us if we knew what was happening and where that sound was coming from. Of course, we didn't. So he said, come with me. And he walked us to the side of the stream. And you could see at just the edge of the stream, the different length reeds that were broken off by the wind. And, we scratched our heads for a moment, and then all of a sudden the light went on and we realized what was happening as the wind blew across the top of these reeds, the different length reeds. It excited them into sound. And the shorter ones were the higher pitched voices and the longer ones were the lower pitched voices. And that was where probably people were inspired to create the panpipes, those pipes that are all along like that. And he said to us, well, let me show you one other thing. And he walked into the stream, and cut off a length of reed and bored some holes in it, and then started to play. And he said, this is how we got our music, and that's how you got yours.
And you were forced to agree, I'm sure.
Then you say nothing. There's nothing you can say that's better than that.
So now you suddenly discover this magic that you've been missing. So how did it affect you going forward then, professionally and personally?
Well, I got started with this mostly because we had an album to do for Warner Brothers. It was our first album for Warner Brothers called In a Wild Sanctuary. In a Wild Sanctuary was the first album on the theme of ecology. It was also the first album ever to use natural sound as a component of orchestration. It came out in 1970. It meant that either Paul, my late music partner, or I had to go out into the field and record some sounds because we had nothing in our library for that. We were doing film scores and doing just sound effects with a Moog synthesizer. So it meant that one of us had to go into the field and record because Paul refused to do it. It was left to me. And off I marched into a local park north of San Francisco and turned on this recorder. Well, I have to tell you that that moment changed my life. The space opened up and I heard the natural soundscape for the first time in this amplified way, this surreal way. And I thought to myself, I really feel good. I feel relaxed. I feel connected to a world I hadn't really known before because I'd been working in recording studios without any windows. So we never had any connection to the outside world. Well, when I felt this way listening to these sounds, because I have a terrible case of ADHD, I felt calm for the first time in a long time. And I thought to myself, I've got to figure out a way to do this for the rest of my life. I was 30 years old then. And the next 10 years was an effort to break away from music. And finally, after working on Apocalypse Now and getting fired 8 times, by the way, I got fired and then hired back. So at double the amount of money. So it worked out just fine. Anyway, after working on Apocalypse Now, I just quit music. In 1979, went back to school, got my PhD in bioacoustics, which is recording sounds of living organisms, and have never looked back.
Amazing. So apart from it being so therapeutic for your ADHD, you said you were raised in a household which really wasn't big on animals and didn't like pets. And so how did you go from that kind of wild places being scary to this being a love affair with wilderness, which you feel totally at ease in now?
Well, it took a while, Mary, because I was really afraid of the natural world and being outside. I was taught that it was dangerous and dirty, that you would die from disease if you weren't bitten and scratched to death. So I had to get over those fears, and little by little, I was able to do that. And certainly because being in the presence of these natural soundscapes and these biophonies, what I call biophonies, natural sound, that's the collective sound everybody hears in the natural world, it just made me feel good. And so I did it primarily in the beginning because I felt better. physically, emotionally, psychically, I felt a lot better. So it didn't occur to me to really do this thing scientifically until I tried to figure out how I was going to make a living recording animal sounds, and immediately hit on the idea of doing these soundscapes for museums and aquaria and zoos. And that's how I got involved in doing it seriously as an avocation. I mean, as a vocation.
So before we proceed and discuss the actual analysis of what we hear, when you've come up with these new terminologies for the world, really, I want to invite the audience to chime in at any point, either with questions or do you have favorite sounds that calm you or make you feel at home, or do you have any of those? And are some of those sounds now gone, if in fact you've moved from an environment where
Well,
they're no longer
there's
available?
actually two parts to that question. The first are my favorite sounds. I think my favorite place to record is Alaska, because there are so few. There are 730,000 people in an area 3 times the size of France. So you can really get away from populations and people for long periods of time. It's like Bill McKibben says, when he tries to describe, he was asked once what he meant by wild. And his answer was, wild is a place where you can walk for 2 weeks in any direction and never hit a fence or a road. It's also a place where you don't see forest rangers telling you about the life cycle of a grizzly bear. And last of all, and best, it's a place where there's nothing to buy. And that's what he called wild. So wild is really important. The second part of that question is, I missed it. Go for it. Tell me again,
Yeah,
Mary.
we're talking about favorite sounds, and then have those environments disappeared? Some of those sounds actually, are they gone?
Well, my library consists of about 5,000 hours of material now in 1,100 different habitats. And what's remarkable about this collection is that well over 50% of the recordings that I have come from habitats that no longer exist. Either they're altogether silent, or they've been transformed so radically by human endeavor that you can't hear the natural soundscape really anymore in those habitats. That's remarkable. And that's just since 1968. It's a very short span of time. So we're losing living organisms and living environments at that rate.
That's staggering. That's very, very sad. So just to make sure people knew that I was inviting anybody, we've got 147 people involved in this program. So any of you who want to tell us your favorite sounds or the location of your favorite sound. I know that one thing I miss a great deal from England is larks going up in the morning, in the early morning, in the high sky. They go ascend and they sing, and it's just amazing, that sound.
Beautiful, beautiful recordings of those.
Okay, so let's go back to, before we talk about how you analyzed sounds and came up with this vocabulary, part of the problem now, apart from the actual sounds themselves disappearing, is that the cacophony that we've created in this noisy, busy environment, mostly urban, but not entirely, has basically kind of zoned out a lot of the natural sounds. So we're attuned now, our ears, to the ping of a cell phone or some device going off or some technical unnatural sound. And we don't hear the bird songs as much.
No.
So you've written about this a bit in your latest book, The Power of Tranquility in a Very Noisy World. So what was the thinking behind that? What were you hoping to get people to pay attention to?
I wanted people to begin to listen again, and to listen to this, and to understand the way that the soundscape affects us. All of these sounds, these pings on our phone, and the ringtones, and all of the rest of the stuff that we are exposed to in terms of the acoustic world around us, is distracting. The news is distracting. everything that we hear, all of the ads on television that we hear, or radio that we hear, are affecting us in profound ways, mostly distracting us and keeping us from understanding the things that we need to know, like how healthy the habitats that we live in are. And, I mean, the more we're exposed to this stuff, the more pathological we become as a culture. And if you don't believe that, just watch the news.
And also the consumption of people that are basically trying to calm themselves and zone out. A huge industry of people trying to get away from it somehow, either meditating or, taking whatever they need to take to sleep, because the background noise is fiercely loud unless you're lucky enough not to live in a very urban environment.
Yeah, and the power of tranquility gives us some ideas about what we can do to mitigate that issue. The issues of loss of sleep, the issues of stress, and the role that noise plays in all of those things.
Okay, so let's listen to some of the soundscapes, these wonderful soundscapes that you get to enjoy at the museum. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you to just explain about the vocabulary that you had to invent, because there wasn't really any kind of vocabulary when you were talking about the narrative of the living world when you started. Yeah. So you talked about Geophony, Biophony, and Anthropophony.
Anthropophony, but Anthropophony will work. Anthropophony is okay.
So maybe you could just explain what these are and how they overlap in terms of sound.
Well, there's this wonderful composer and naturalist from Canada who just died last year by the name of Murray Schafer. And he invented the term soundscape in 1977 in his great book, Tuning of the World. And he described the soundscape as all of the sound that reaches our ears from whatever source. The problem is he didn't define the sources. The other problem is we're a visual culture. And as a visual culture, all of the things that we have to describe the world around us, all that vocabulary is visual. I mean, when I was scoring films, the director would come up to us and say, I want this scene to be kind of red in color, or brown in color, or white in color. That's how they describe visually the acoustic world. Well, I thought to myself, well, geez, as a musician, I understand the Latin and Italian terms, the expressions are used in music, but we need some stuff to describe the sources of music. So the first source that I came up with a colleague by the name of Stuart Gage, from Michigan State University, a professor there, was the geophony. Geo meaning earth, and phone from the Greek meaning sound. So sounds of the earth, and by that I meant natural sounds like the impressions of wind in the trees or grasses, water in a stream, waves at the ocean shore, movement of the earth, that kind of thing. So that was the geophony, and the geophony was Geophony was one of the first sounds on Earth around 4.5 billion years ago. But it wasn't until organisms began to evolve and be affected by and producing sounds about 55 million years ago that those sounds were able to be heard. And so when the organisms formed, I call that the biophony, the collective sound that's produced by all organisms in a given habitat at one place in one time. And then we had to think of, I had a special category for us because we're so damn noisy. Anyway, and I called that anthrophony or anthropophony. Anthropo meaning human, and phone again meaning sound. So sounds humans produce. And that has two levels to it. One is controlled sound like music, theater, and language. And the other is incoherent or chaotic sound that I refer to as noise. And it's the noise that surrounds us that's really a problem. And we have to figure out a way to mitigate that. Most of those suggestions are part of that the power of tranquility.
Okay, so so people can hear a little bit about this. So first you have your soundscape made up of these elements, and then you have animated spectrograms, which give you a graphic illustration of the soundtrack, rather like an orchestra score. You can see what comes in and goes out. So you say that each organism finds its own kind of bandwidth in there, and it's got a little acoustic niche. And that's tonally, in terms of the full range of the scale, and then temporally going in and out in space. So let's listen to, we've got 7 little clips that are from the exhibit at the Peabody Essex. And the first one is the Amazon, I believe, which we're going to listen to.
Yeah.
So that's a jaguar we're hearing. So
the growl in the background is the jaguar. That's right.
So I don't know how close you have to get to a jaguar to get that.
10 meters in this case.
Oh,
yeah.
And that's a whole book on its own, how you got these sounds, I think. The next one I think is probably my favorite, just because it sounds like a conversation between two whales.
I'd like to point out one thing, Mary, I'm sorry. The spectrograms that you're seeing are not correlated to the sounds that we're hearing right now. I just wanted to make that clear. What we do in the exhibit is we wanted to show a visual example, because we're a visual culture. I wanted to show a visual example of the sound. And that's the only way that we can do it, through the spectrograms. And you can see clearly there where all of the, like you said, where all of the animals fit in these acoustic niches, where they establish bandwidth for themselves. And the reason that they do that is so their voices won't be masked by other voices. So it's just like if you can imagine a musical score, it's just like a composer will score music so that the violins stay out of the way of the horns or the percussion. And it's all very carefully, I won't say orchestrated, because that's a little bit too presumptuous, but all of these animals, in order to thrive, have to find their own niche in order to survive. And the acoustic niche is their establishment of territory. Second one.
So the second one, I think, is, I love whales anyway. So I think this is humpback whales, and they sound like they're having a conversation. So Bernie, I guess that's another whole life's work, somebody discerning what all that clicking and singing is.
Well, the singing are the humpback whales, and recorded off Hawaii, off of Maui. And the other sounds, the clicking and the popping that you hear, are fish. And there are about 30 different species of fish in this soundtrack because they make up part of the soundscape of the marine environments. And it's very important to know that we have 200 species of fish recorded.
Wow. And you have that clicking noise is also the whales, the clicking.
A clicking noise is the fish.
Fish.
Yeah, gnawing on coral.
Wow, it's loud.
Yeah, it is loud, you bet.
So we've got a ton of questions coming in, but so we can't play, I don't think, all of these, but the wolves are rather nice. This is the Algolquin Wolves, I think.
Algonquin Park is just north of Toronto, about a few hundred miles north of Toronto. And it's a wonderful park that goes all the way up in Ontario, all the way up to the north. And there are still wolves there. And they are wild and kept wild, and they don't shoot them or hunt them in Algonquin Park. They let them live. And there were 2 packs, by the way, that you'll hear.
It's wonderful, wonderful sound. I'm not sure I'd like to hear it on my own.
Oh, actually, I was between 2 packs of wolves that were converging on one another. And it was the most extraordinary moment of my life. I think if one moment stands out in recording this stuff, it's seeing the color of being close enough to see the color of their eyes and being able to record them without feeling in danger. It never even occurred.
How did you not feel endangered?
It said they weren't being aggressive.
So actually, that's one of the questions someone said over here. Have you got a story about a personal interaction with a creature who interacted with you through their sound while you were present?
We just did.
Right. She said she had a moment with a wood thrush, Cynthia. I'm not quite sure what it amounted to, but that's all she said. The other thing you talked about is as if you refer to a divine harmony in a healthy natural ecosystem with everything occupying its own little acoustic space.
Yeah.
And you said it was your religion at one point, as though it was almost sacred.
Well, these sounds are sacred to me. When I'm in a forest, which is wild and still vibrant with wildlife and expressing itself as a healthy environment, that's as close to the divine as I've ever got. I can't imagine being in a church or a mosque or a synagogue or any other, place that we call religious that's had a stronger impact on me. I mean, the sounds of the natural world are to me the voice of the divine. And these are the sermons on the mount. These are the these are the homilies that we need to hear.
They are the homilies we need to hear. So you're saying a healthy soundtrack sounds one way, and then a stressed ecosystem sounds sort of chaotic.
Yeah, yes. If you take because in a stressed system, all of the animals are competing for bandwidth with one another, and they often overlap until they finally, work out where their space is going to be acoustically. And in a healthy habitat, the discrimination between all the sounds, between the insects and the frogs and the birds and the mammals, the discrimination between them is not only easily heard, but also you can see the clear imprint on these spectrograms, which is why we show the spectrograms in the museum. Because this graphic illustration of sound, this narrative of place, as we call it, is really important to understand and to know, and which is why we've been doing this work for so long now, and why it's beginning to have an impact on people, and create a document for people who are looking for habitat management and healthy habitat management. We have examples of that. So this is what you try to aim for.
And even to the point of where you've got a symbiotic relationship between people, the indigenous people, and their environment.
Yeah.
They also are respectful of that, because when you recorded the women, pygmies in Central African Republic, picking mushrooms,
Yeah, the
that
Biophony.
soundtrack, yeah, you could hear them singing in a space that didn't take over or overlap with any of the animal spaces.
That's right. Because they sing, because the ways in which the Bayaka of the Central African Republic in the Zongasonga rainforest and the Hivaro in the Amazon basin and the Kalali in Papua New Guinea, all of these groups live closely connected to the natural world. They live off of and in the forest. And they use the natural soundscapes as not only GPS maps at night, acoustic maps at night, so they can walk through these grids of sound and they know exactly where they are in the forest without ever using a torch or navigating by starlight, because they can't see through the canopies. So they use these soundscapes for that. They also use the soundscapes for hunts. They can tell what animal is down the path a quarter of a mile by the way that the soundscape is expressed. They are so attuned to this natural world that they're able to make those discrimination, that discrimination. And of course, for me, the most important thing is they use the natural soundscape as a karaoke orchestra with which they perform. They understand that the soundscape is triggering them into sound, and they imitate birds, and they imitate mammals, and they imitate the ways in which animals move, which is how we got our dance. And how we got our orchestration, by the way, because of the ways in which all the animals align themselves.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, over here we got quite a lot of different questions. I know your music from the album Gad Harva, and I've read your book. How much of the growing natural silence due to the lack of insects as opposed to animals?
Well, insects are animals, and so are we.
Well, he's, I guess, maybe talking about amphibians and mammals versus insects. The sounds.
I think in Germany, there was a report last year that 70% of the insect life is gone. We're losing several different individual species every day. This is called we're in the period of the Anthropocene, which is also a period noted as the sixth extinction. Richard Leakey just died last week, and or a couple of weeks ago, and he was one of the leaders of this whole, dialogue now about the sixth extinction. The rhinoceros is almost extinct. There are many other kinds of critters that are going extinct as well, whether they're large or small. I mean, we're talking about insects that are microscopic, that are endangered. So it ranges all across the spectrum. I mean, there's no one class of animals that is at issue here. We're all at issue, including us, especially.
Couple of more questions here. Have you ever captured the sound of large glaciers calving?
Yes, not only calving, but also I was up in Alaska at the Hubbard Glacier, which is just east of Yakutat, north of Glacier Bay. And I dropped a hydrophone, an underwater microphone, down a crevasse of the moving mass of the glacier, not the leading edge where the calving takes place. But I dropped it down in a crevasse, which is kind of a deep canyon that's formed by by the movement of the glacier, and recorded the whole mass of the glacier moving a few centimeters, an hour over this whole mass. And as it was moving, we got the recording of that. And so, yes, we've got a part of the glacier that's never been recorded before.
Another unusual question, I don't know if you answer to this. Do subterranean species communicate through sound? For example, the spotted salamander.
The spotted salamander, every living organism that creates a sound signature. So as a matter of fact, there's a fellow at Cambridge who in 2001 wrote a paper about the sound of viruses as they detach themselves from a T cell. And he's actually got the sound of a virus, which is not quite a living organism, but still it is remarkable. So yes, we have, there's no organism that doesn't create a sound. We just have to figure out how to get it.
Well, you surprised me greatly when I was listening to an interview you did. You were talking about the fact that trees actually do sing, and that corn, you can hear it growing.
Yeah. Yeah, because corn, if you can think of the structure of the corn, it's kind of
Telescope.
A telescope type of thing, and it squeaks as it grows at night. So it has this kind of, as you're stripping the stalks off corn, you could hear a little squeak. Well, that's what happens with the stalk as it's telescoping and growing at night. So the tree is a little different. We recorded the sound of a cottonwood tree, which had gone through a long period of drought. And what was happening was we drilled a tiny hole about the size of a pencil eraser here, if you can see that, into the tree, and inserted a hydrophone of about the same size, and got this tapping sound. But what was happening with these taps was it was cells that were sucking in air to maintain osmotic pressure. And when the cells dried, because they weren't able to get water anymore because it was part of a drought, when the cells dried and sucked in too much air, they would pop and then form, the dead cells would form the rings around the tree. Well, we got this recording at 2 octaves beyond what you would normally hear on a piano, way high up there, and slowed it up by a factor of 5, and got these cells popping, and that's what we recorded with the tree. Now, in the xylem and the phloem of the tree, which is in the trunk of the tree, the pathways by which nutrition and water is distributed to the branches and the leaves. This whole system depends on those cells breaking down and causing the rings on the tree to form. So yeah, we got that sound. What happens is because the sound is up at 70 kilohertz, which is way beyond what we can hear. We hear to 20 kilohertz if we have really good hearing. It sounds like a tone, like a very high-pitched tone. And insects are drawn to that tone because they know there's going to be sap. And then when the sap comes out, they know that there's going to be birds drawn to the food of the insects on the tree. So it's a whole ecosystem that's established by the fact that these cells are popping and creating this noise.
Amazing, amazing
Yeah.
stuff. So two more here. Speaking of which, of the things we can't hear, we all know that this really affects the ocean in a big time. So Greg has asked, how can we restore and preserve the ocean biophony? Probably the least understood soundscape on the planet, maybe.
Boy, that's a tough question because there's both deep ocean soundscapes and also pelagic, literal ones, which are kind of more coastal and not deep ocean. The ways that we can preserve it is to cut down the noise of these ships, the cavitation that's caused by the rotation of the propellers on these very, very large ships. And also the navies of the world that put out these incredibly loud and destructive sounds that actually have affected whales to the point where they've beached and died. There's a fellow up in Friday Harbor who started this whole thing of marine noise that affects killer whales. A fellow named Ken Balcom, who's been doing a lot of research on that. So yeah, we just have to, excuse the expression, like my wife says, we just shut the hell up, and be more quiet and figure out ways to do that.
I think we all need less noise. All of us will be better off. So you bring up a good question here. You mentioned this expression, incoherent dissonance of modern living.
Yeah.
An assault on the brain, which I think it is, and overtaking the natural soundtrack so we don't hear these things. So how do we learn to tune out the noise? Because we can't really turn our ears off.
We just have to find quiet places and establish quiet places for ourselves. Quiet down the bedrooms where we sleep so that we don't hear televisions through the walls or traffic noise outside. Create neighborhoods that are quieter by planting vegetation that absorbs sound rather than reflects it. We have to quiet down cars and straight piping motorcycles, which are a big deal with guys who feel very macho and want to express themselves. Same thing with cars that are straight pipes. We just have to cut out all that noise and make it a quieter world. There was I tell a story in my book, The Power of Tranquility, about the guy by the name of James Watt, who was Ronald Reagan's Secretary of the Interior in the early 80s. And he defunded the Office of Noise Abatement, which was part of the EPA in America. When asked in 1982 why he did that, he said, well, and this really explains the whole thing kind of, he said, noise is power. And the noisier we are as Americans, the more powerful we appear to be to others.
Oof.
Go figure that. Isn't that great? I mean, it's a great quote.
It is. It's pretty grim.
Yeah.
Think about it.
And then he shut down the Office of Noise Abatement, which is still in existence, by the way, but it's now under the Housing and Urban Development Group, under HUD. He's still alive, but he's not too well.
Not as loud. So you've talked about the pristine loveliness of wildernesses in particularly like Alaska. But you've also been to some awfully decimated environments like Chernobyl, which is still not possible to have human inhabitants there, but a lot of nature has returned there, which is kind of eerie in a way. And I've seen the film of the empty power station with these wolves and everything walking around. So first of all, does that give you cause for hope that something is as
Well, if we just leave things alone, the natural world has a way of coming back to some kind of vibrant vitality. There's a fellow who in 2006 did a recording there of, his name's Peter Cusack from the UK. And he did a recording of Chernobyl in the springtime, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, every animal you can imagine is expressing itself there, and it's a wonderful, wonderful example of how things can return if we just leave them alone. We don't have to do anything. I mean, sometimes when we do stuff and we plan all this stuff out, we do more harm than if we wouldn't do anything at all.
you talked about another example of that, of the Gray Ranch on the Mexican border, which
Yeah.
also,
There was a place that the Nature Conservancy was running. They owned a 500,000 acre ranch, if you can imagine, which is in the panhandle of New Mexico. And it takes up a good share of that whole panhandle. It goes down to the Mexican border. And when we were recording there in the 90s, it was still owned by the Nature Conservancy and run by the Nature Conservancy. They had cut, it was part of the Sonora Chihuahuan desert transition area. And cattle had been run on it since the Spanish came, with pretty heavy consequences to the environment. But when the Nature Conservancy came in, they cut down a lot of the cattle numbers. And because the population had dropped, the habitat had begun to come back and restore itself. Native plants were beginning to sprout. And it seemed as if for a short time, the conditions were really extraordinary there, that things were beginning to change for the better. I don't know, I haven't been down there in a long time now, and I don't know if that condition was a condition of sale to the next group that purchased that property. I suspect it was, but I don't know what's happening there.
gosh, I'm torn here. We've got a lot of people asking questions, and we've got some people asking to hear more of your clips. So maybe we should at least play at least one more of your clips. I know we've got an elephant, we've got the baboons. Let's see.
It's about the Zongasonga rainforest. If we can do fourth one.
Yeah, the elephants. Yeah.
By the way, this is a group of social sounds that the elephants are expressing, and they've gathered around this, what's called a bai, which is a B-A-I, which is a swamp, and they're able to, these families are able to go there and get salt, which is, it's partly a salt lick as well. And so they get salt from the earth and the water, And this is why they gather there. This whole herd was maybe 20 animals has been poached now. It's all gone. Yeah, because of people from Cameroon and nearby, the poachers from nearby forests. So a lot of these animals have been poached for ivory. These are great forest elephants. They're really remarkable animals.
So I had wished to go and talk a little bit more about your concerns about the future of the planet, which are deep, and of course we all share them. But at least now we're living in a period in America where at least climate crisis is acknowledged as a real thing and no longer a hoax. I'm not celebrating the fact about the crisis. I'm simply saying it's no longer debatable. So you yourself lived through a terrible wildfire in 2017 in California.
Yeah, we did.
And I think you wrote a remarkable essay about it, and you lost everything. Yeah,
we did. If I can read that part, because I think it's really just a section of it. In early October 2017, my wife Catherine and I lost everything in the wildfires that destroyed large areas of Northern California. Gone was our home in Glen Ellen, our dear cats, Seaweed and Barnacle, all of my detailed field journals going back nearly half a century, slides and photos of work in the field, reference books, nearly 70 years of historic correspondence, the wonderful sounding Manuke Papazian guitar that I played at Carnegie Hall as a member of the Weavers, fine art, clothes, furniture. The intensity of the inferno was so great that the refrigerator, holy cow, the refrigerator, I wanted to do this, the refrigerator and the engine block of Catherine's car, my wife, melted into unrecognizable puddles of aluminum. And except for us, not one single item that we had amassed over the arc of our lives survived. With no warning from first responders, county or law enforcement agencies, we were mercifully awake at 2:30 in the morning, on 9th of October, when the hillside outside the front door of our house suddenly burst into flame, and we fled Wild Sanctuary, our home of 25 years, for the last time.
Gosh. It's such an moving account. I mean, it's one thing to know that this is going on and that these fires are happening and that the decimation on the ecosystems are occurring across the planet, but to live through it firsthand, I can't imagine. And yet you've kept going, and you managed to keep your recordings digitally on the cloud. Is that right?
Yeah, and the recordings are the archive is saved at the Fondation Cartier in Paris. They have a copy of it.
That's wonderful.
They had a copy of it 6 months before the fire, by the way, because we wanted to get our stuff offshore because of the anti-science and anti-climate position of the US government. So I wanted to make sure we were able to save it. A lot of our friends from EPA and National Science Foundation have got their stuff offshore too. It's like Fahrenheit 451. Yeah. I want to, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bernie.
I just wanted to say that, climate is not a political issue. Every living system on this planet is affected across the board, and there's no escape, not even to Mars. And all of our actions have consequences. And the ways in which these things can be preserved is evident at in this piece that I created at the Peabody Essex Museum. And it's something that everybody has to hear, because this is what's possible.
Well, everybody, get your skates on, because the exhibit is open and it's on till May. So wonderful opportunity for people to indulge themselves, immerse themselves in that experience. So lots more people, lots more questions, but maybe perhaps we will be able to post that whole link to your essay for people to read the whole thing in its entirety.
Sure.
So brilliant, on the
Thank you.
website. So the time has come, believe it or believe it not, the hour has flown by. We could talk to you for a couple of days, Bernie, and it would still be exciting.
Thank you.
But, so I would like to thank you for your time and your work, remarkable work of art and science really combined. And also thank Jane Winchell from the Peabody Essex. She's lurking, there she is.
Oh, Mary, can I just jump in and mention there's a fantastic documentary about Bernie's life that is being featured at the museum in conjunction with the exhibition that Fondation Cartier produced. And so that's a 37-minute documentary that also includes footage of what Bernie was speaking about, of the remarkable fire that and what was left. So I did want to mention that and to thank you so much for this
wonderful.
opportunity.
No, that's wonderful. I didn't realize that. That's another reason to go. And of course, Bernie's books are wonderful reads, both of them. One in conjunction with the exhibition, the Animal Orchestra, the Orchestra of the World. So Cambridge Forum is made possible through the generosity of Herbert and Dorothy Vetter, the Lowell Institute, Mass Cultural Council, and you. So step up if you haven't donated and sign up to our members list on the website, www.cambridgeforum.org, where you will find podcasts of this and our other programs and links to all the videos that GBH Forum Network have kindly edited and uploaded to YouTube, so you can enjoy those. And we also have a great collection of newly digitized classic recordings for you to enjoy. We create this, as you know, as an NPR broadcast weekly for anyone who's missed it. You can listen to it, tell your friends, watch the videos, revisit the podcast. So the next forum is going to be on Tuesday, February the 8th. We can go to the other side of the universe of possibility and consider the curse of the smartphone. Is it the best thing or the worst thing that ever happened to us? And what do you think? And the Zoom registration link for that will be posted on our website shortly. So thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Bernie. Thank you, Janie. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.